But it wasn't actually until we met, Heather, that I officially called myself a copywriter. I don't think that you know that, but I had gone to that conference with my friend Doris, and I had been calling myself like a content writer. I knew I was a writer, content writer, but I wouldn't call myself a copywriter. I was like, oh, that's not for me, that label. And then I talked to Shanti Zach, actually, who's like a quiz copywriter, and we were chatting, and she's like, "Are you a copywriter?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, I was like, I do all this launch writing and I do all this stuff. She's like, "You're a copywriter. Just like own it." So I walked out of that conference that week and being like, I'm a freaking copywriter. and realizing I had been doing it for years, just hadn't like allowed myself to take the label on. So sort of my windy story.
Well, hey friends, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I've been waiting for this week's interview for like quite literally months. It's working for Sarah and I to get this interview scheduled. But today we're going to talk about the polar opposite of what I do, which is, y'all, I teach you how to be more articulate with your words, how to be more confident when you're saying your words, how to come across as more an authority and be more persuasive with your language in the written form. Today's guest, Sara Vartanian, is going to teach you how you can be equally persuasive and equally compelling with your words in the written form. Today's episode, I'm bringing you my personal copywriter, the person who's like the genius behind all of our launches in our business. She's the person who writes our sales pages, writes a lot of our email sequences. You are going to meet the person that allows us to sound like ourselves in written form. Yes, we get help in those areas. You're going to meet her, and she is an absolute masterful wordsmith. But more importantly, she teaches people how to sound like themselves and get results from the written word. So let me tell you a little bit about Sara. She's a launch strategist and copywriter at saravartanian.com and hosts the Launch Playbook podcast, which I had the honor of being on earlier this year. And I talked specifically around like persuasive selling with your words. So that is a really great episode of my interview on her podcast, which we will link it also in the show notes. But Sara her focus is helping business owners use research and data to map their customers' journeys so they can craft a launch experience that makes people they love serving most feel seen and heard. So Sara is really masterful of helping you identify the language your audience uses, also identifying your unique things, the things about your personality, pulling those two things together and copy in a function that gets results. And on today's interview, I loved it so much because we bridge this idea between the verbal word and the written word, and whether or not you're more comfortable to saying things out loud, or maybe you're more comfortable, like Sara, typing out or writing words. It doesn't matter which area. You need both in your business for you to be able to be compelling, to be charismatic, to build out your brand and your following. You have to be able to do both. So what I loved about today's conversation is it was a very unscripted, very real, very hilarious. Spoiler alert, I called Sara a hoe in the episode. Not the kind of hoe that you think. You will soon learn. We also talked about chastity belts and lubricant, and none of which in the way that you think we would talk about it. It's a very different, there's a hilarious story in there. So there's just like a little teaser of the weirdness that we get in today's episode. This is a really fun one. I think you're going to laugh right alongside us. My vision for you for listening to this episode is that it feels like you are present with us, having a cup of coffee and just talking about the real reality of writing words, speaking words in your business, and the struggle bus that a lot of us fall onto when it comes to the volume of copy that we inherently discover we have to create. It is a lot. And with Sara's help, it can be really fun. It can be personality packed, and it doesn't have to feel so heavy. So Sara delivers so many brilliant gems in this episode, including how to actually get yourself into the mode of writing when you are feeling stuck for your weekly newsletter. She gives 4 really incredible tips. So pay attention to that. It's one of the last questions I asked her. She also talks about 2 of the biggest areas that people tend to focus on that they think is a problem, and the shift that you need to make to focus on instead. Really loved how she got into answering the question, is my copy too long? Am I writing too much? She'll answer that. And she's also going to answer one of my favorite shifts that I made when I got into writing more copy online. It's how do you release yourself from the level of professional communication that you probably learned when you were working in corporate or some kind of customer service job in your life? You probably brought in this language that's a little too stiff, maybe a little too formal, but to shake that off and bring a little bit more casual language. And she's going to teach you how to do that. This one is so freaking good. Please do me a favor right now. And as you head into the episode, take a screenshot, share this on Instagram, tag both me at the Heather Sager and Sara at Sara Vartanian. Both links are in the show notes. Please share this one with your friends. This is one that more people need to hear, because as you build your online business, copy and clearly communicating your ideas is not just a nice to have, is it a necessity? And today's episode is going to help you with just that. Without further ado, here's my conversation with copywriter and launch strategist, Sara Vartanian. All right. Well, Sara, welcome officially to the show. I'm so thrilled we're finally freaking doing this. Hello.
Oh my gosh, Heather, I am so happy we're here. I know it has been, as I was saying to you in the green room before, of a dream to be on your podcast. And I know you've been on mine, so I'm so happy to be on yours finally.
It's so good. Okay, we gotta tell the story around how Sara and I met 3 years ago. It actually has been 3 years. 3 years ago in September was our meeting anniversary, where we met at a live event in Niagara Falls, Canada. I'm remembering that like behind the windows at the back end of the conference was picturesque. You can see Niagara Falls over the back. You and I were getting coffee and we chatted. This is very creepy that I'm remembering this so clearly, but you were one of the rare people in the online space that I met in person before I met virtually. I don't know.
Same. You are for me too. Yeah. Cause I don't go to that many conferences. And there's not many that are in Canada, and I'm in Canada. So it was about like an hour and a half from my house. So I could not resist attending, of course.
Yeah. So that was so great. And since then we have built a great friendship. And then full disclaimer, y'all, I had the wonderful opportunity of hiring Sara last spring to help us with the launch of our wonderful program, the Speaker Society, and help us get stuff off the ground for the Speaker Co. And so after working with Sara now, I was like, oh my gosh, y'all, I have to bring her on to tell you all of the things around what she does. So no like pressure here, Sara. You are gonna deliver today. I know you will.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Heather.
Yeah, and so I want to hear the story of Sara around how did you get started with copywriting? Because I don't know this story, and I'm very curious around why the written word. How did you get here?
Oh my gosh, I think the story for me is always changing. I don't know if your origin story is always evolving as you realize more threads are pulling together, but like the long story is I used to be a teacher for 10 years, and I was always a writer, though I realized, like journaling and reading and writing. And my favorite part of teaching was always English. Like I loved teaching stories and how to write. I taught elementary school. But during my second mat leave, I decided I wanted to do something different. So I actually started this online cloth diaper shop, which really has nothing to do with writing, it sounds like, right? But I was really into like green living, and I wanted to I was like very environmentally conscious and was worried about stuff. So it was like definitely something that was a side hustle. Like it just wasn't going to replace my teaching income. But when I was writing the website for it and the product descriptions and things like that, I started doing something I call like reading the internet. I was reading all these forums, all these questions people were asking, and I set my website up, and I actually bought cloth diapers to sell that directly solve people's problems. If they were like, I live in an apartment and I share laundry. Okay, well, this is what they would need. And so I wrote for that. Okay, well, I want something that's almost like disposable diapers, which is so it'd be like an all-in-one cloth diaper. So I wrote to that. And so what that had happened when I actually put my website out there was people started buying because I specifically addressed their problems. I started getting invited to write on some Canadian eco blogs or magazines, come out and do workshops. And I really realized the power of writing and listening to people, and how if you directly do so, it leads to sales. From there, I evolved into a green living blog. I actually closed my shop because I realized how much I liked the writing piece. Started writing for green beauty companies and other educational companies. And then again, it evolved into having my own clients. And I closed the blog and started writing for these clients. And then they were starting to launch, right? Like they had these services and then they decided they want to take their service, move it into an online offer. So I started writing their launches. But it wasn't actually until we met, Heather, that I officially called myself a copywriter. I don't think that you know that, but I had gone to that conference with my friend Doris, and I had been calling myself like a content writer. I knew I was a writer, content writer, but I wouldn't call myself a copywriter. I was like, oh, that's not for me, that label. And then I talked to Shanti Zach, actually, who's like a quiz copywriter, and we were chatting, and she's like, "Are you a copywriter?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, I do all this launch writing and I do all this stuff. She's like, "You're a copywriter. Just like own it." So I walked out of that conference that week and being like, I'm a freaking copywriter. and realizing I had been doing it for years, just hadn't allowed myself to take the label on. So sort of my windy story to get to where I am now.
I had no idea. I'm laughing around you're putting the puzzle together to talk to people more specifically around diapers. So yeah. I'm having a huge flashback right now. So when I was 10 years old, no, I did not wear diapers. Watch out for where this is going. Okay. So my oldest sister is 12 years older than me. So she had her first baby at 22. I was 10. So I became an aunt at the age of 10. And that summer after my niece was born, I was the official babysitter. I was certified babysitter. Babysitter's Club was my favorite book series at that age. I was the neighborhood babysitter. But I remember my sister insisted on, this is in the 90s, insisted on using cloth diapers. And I remember thinking this is so freaking disgusting. They lived in an apartment, but I would imagine they had something that someone like you who wrote wonderful copy that had this whole thing positioned around, you live in an apartment, no problem. We will come pick up your whatever. This whole diaper service. Anyways, I'm having flashbacks because I blocked this out of my brain of that summer. I changed cloth diapers and we were eco-conscious and it was also very disgusting. So that's the opener of the podcast today, y'all.
Love it. Diapers.
All right. So here's something that's interesting. So at the conference that we met, we had a conversation around something really interesting. I remember we were chatting at the coffee filling station and then you came, I taught a breakout little mini session around speaking. And I remember you sharing with me that the idea of saying words out loud and speaking was mildly terrifying. And I remember thinking, I don't think I expressed this at the time, but I remember thinking, the idea of having to write words on paper and have that be the only way I communicate with someone, that's terrifying. So I think it's very interesting. And this is where we want to start the conversation today is all of us have kind of different personalities when it comes to communicating words. There's different mediums to communicate words. I want to hear from your perspective around how, have you always, you mentioned you loved English, but have you always been more in favor of the written word? Just talk to me a little bit more about that and your relationship with the spoken word too.
Oh my gosh. Yes. 100%. Yes. I've been in favor of the written word always. And I think I'm definitely a really avid reader. I think at this point this year, I've read 120 books almost. If I look at my library app, I read all the time. And so I think I'm just written, and maybe that's the introvert side of me too, but there's nothing that makes me happier than reading or writing, essentially cozying up and doing so. But being scared of the written word goes back to school when we had to do those presentations and stand up. I can feel myself getting sweaty now at the idea of doing that. And then even when I was teaching, I was often asked to do presentations and I would do them, right? I would do them. I would step up. I was a whole reading coach for our area of teachers. And I would go around to schools and teach stuff, but I was deeply uncomfortable. The more that I repeated something, of course, and the more familiar I became with the topic, the easier it became and the more myself I became. But I definitely would spend a lot of time scripting things out ahead of time. And I would have to find myself walking around the house, talking it out. And I didn't know how, do other people do that? Is that normal? But still, I think my biggest fear around it was, what if they ask me something that I don't know the answer to? And that is still something that will trip me up before, let's say I do a podcast like this or a summit. I'm thinking, what if something happens? I've more learned to embrace the fact that I don't have to know everything. And it's funny, Heather, because that's something I would teach my students, right? It was it's okay not to know the answer. Like, we can try, and you can say, I don't know. That's a great question. Let's talk about it. But, it seems like I would put myself on another spot, right? Like, that's good for you, but not for me. So I would say that that's where it is for me.
I think we all relate to that. And I think anybody, especially anyone who teaches anything that's kind of business-esque, right? Or even if somebody who's like a fitness coach, or I think with anything, we all have different recommendations that we have for our audience. But for us, it's like we've already gone through that level of acceptance and awareness that we have just very different expectations of ourselves. And it's such a bummer we do that to ourselves, but we all freaking do that. So I love that I'm now laughing that here I am asking you like all these questions. We have no game plan for this episode today. You have no idea what questions are flying your way. And I'm like, I've just set you up for like your worst nightmare.
I'm comfortable with you. It's good. I'm good.
Part of like the safety of the environment allows for the questions to happen. Okay. So for you, talk to me a little bit about when you work with clients. So you do launch copy. That's primarily your thing, is helping people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what the word I would use to describe you, but you are like a masterful magician slash messaging therapist that helps us on the journey around like, I don't know, we all have such a close relationship with our authors. They're like our child. And then we have all these really complicated relationships with our authors, and we treat them very precious. And you, like, therapy wise, work us through. That's what you did for Emily and I, like how to like approach it and get the most brilliant things out of our head. You're so effing good with launch copy. Do you find that a lot of your clients tend to favor more of the written word or the spoken word?
I would say the spoken word for sure. A lot of them like are really worried about writing. And the truth is probably like you were just saying to me, you set me up for this situation that was like my worst nightmare. But the truth is like, I do know this stuff, right? And I know that I know this stuff. And so the same thing I think with my clients, I'm like, oh man, but you're so good at this. And Heather, like, I know so much of what made writing for you and Emily so great was that you have podcasts, you talk on lives. And so I'm able to go and listen to all the amazing stories that you're telling and thinking, man, this is such a good writing. Like, these are such a good story. They just need to be pulled into the copy. So I think we both probably have it there.
Yeah.
We just, we have a medium that we prefer.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you used on me really well that I think could be a really good tip, and I want you to talk about this, is, you would go and listen to some podcast episodes, or you came to, for example, all of the live webinars that I did, and you would gleam onto these little random things that I said, and then figure out how to make it work into copy. So the language sounded like me, to the point where I read it and I'm like, this sounds more like me than when I say things. Like, it was so funny. Can you talk a little bit about what that was, and maybe like a little tip for other people who want their copy to sound less bland and more like personality punchy?
Yeah, I think when I was listening to you, let's say for your webinars, I was listening for those spots where you got really animated, for example, where I could just tell like you were like really excited to share that piece, or a story that made you laugh yourself. Essentially, like telling it.
I never do that. Like,
you never say anything silly or sarcastic all that stuff. I would note those things down. And also when I noticed let's say for your webinar, when people were responding to something you were saying, when they were like, even just like fire emojis or smile emojis, they're like, oh yes, I can get that. That's the kind of stuff that I was taking notes of, essentially. Because one, it was resonating with your audience. Two, you were loving it, right? And things that made me smile too, or laugh as someone listening, or made me nod my head and be like leaning a little bit closer. So it's taking notes of those type of things. I think when we have those, we can segue into all the learning.
Yeah. Okay. So can you apply that? Can you give me a power tip? Give our audience a power tip around, let's say that they don't have a copywriter, and they how could they emulate that for their own stuff?
I think of the stories that you either are just like telling your friend or your sister or your husband about your day, and they don't have to be big deals. Like, I think we often think that our storytelling has to be this massive, like, I went out and I did all these things. And I don't know, like, I'm a copywriter. I sit on my butt a lot in front of the computer. I don't do a lot. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate. The last couple of years, we've been home a lot more. So things maybe aren't that interesting. But even, like you and I, Heather, we were talking before we started recording that, my son would he's not allowed to drink. We don't drink pop, but my husband drinks pop. But he will reach in to my office. I have this like sliding door thing because it's off the kitchen. He'll reach in during when I'm on a call, and he'll like put his hand into the office, hold a pop, and kind of like shake it, right? So like it's out of my side view. No one else can see it but me. And I'll always like reach my hand up to say no. And then he'll keep doing it until finally I'm like, fine, just do it. And you're just taking it. And that's just like a little side story, but I'm sure that I could work that into, you know, a whole story around like aggressively selling or being like unethical, right? Like using unethical techniques in your copy, because that's an unethical way. He knows I'm going to say no, but he's put me on the spot.
And I'll finally cave because
Exactly.
it's so persuasive, but I'm not going to be happy about it. Like,
so just starting to think about these little like micro moments in your life and writing them down. I'm sure we have like a whole, you know, just a whole bank of them, thinking about things that happen or make you laugh. I think of another one. I was putting away, after we'd been in college in the summer, I was putting away like our, you know, our pillow cases and all that stuff like this. And this really old pillowcase fell down, one that we never used. It's a McDonald's pillowcase. So I have a McDonald's pillowcase. That's like me being a child of the 80s, right? Like, of course you slept in a McDonald's pillowcase.
I want to know, is like the Hamburglar on it? Like,
yes, he is. And then that other like purpley guy, is that the Hamburger? I don't know. There's a bunch of the old, really old characters.
Yeah.
The Fry Guys, all those. So my husband actually has the exact same pillowcase. Okay.
Okay. That's
and
adorable.
so when he moved out with me, he showed up with like a suitcase and a box. And in that box, like he didn't have much. And the box was this McDonald's pillowcase. And I'm like, I have that one. And he's always saying how we're meant to be, how we are meant to meet each other, because we lived in the same neighborhood. We hung out at the same places, but we never met until we were like in our early 20s. So he's like, that's just proof that you were meant to be. So I use that like pillowcase story sometimes to talk about how do you know if your clients are meant to be? Like, what are the signs that you're meant to be and working together? So just these little things, like it was just a pillowcase falling, or my kid putting his hand in the door with a Coke. But these are little micro stories that you can use to segue into stuff. So I think just pay attention to those things.
Yeah.
Things that make you laugh, things that happen in your life. They don't have to be big, involved adventure things. People can relate to those small moments.
I think so often when it comes to, I love that you pivoted into storytelling as this example here. I think so often, I mean, people are always thinking for these really big, epic stories because they see and hear people on TEDx stages or at conferences that have these really grandiose life stories. Yeah. But honestly, those stories, while moving, they're not necessarily relatable. And what you're talking here is like those seemingly insignificant, kind of lame, quote unquote, lame stories. Those are the ones that are actually the best to use in your copy because you don't need a ton of explanation for them. They're easy for people to catch. So one of the, you just actually reminded me, a really great technique for people to find those stories is like when you jump on Zoom and are chit-chatting with someone in that first like 3 minutes, what are the random freaking life updates you give someone? And that is probably a treasure trove of like seemingly mundane shit that you could say, how could I turn this into a lesson? Like, how could I incorporate that into an email or something? So I just wrote that down as an idea for myself of like, what's the random shit I say on Zoom?
Well, and I want to credit you with a lot too of this, Heather, when I think about, you know, when I'm going to go over to the speaking part is that, you know, when we first met at that workshop, I learned from you, you talked about storytelling. And then I took you had this course around getting up on video, like an older, I think it's an archive course now, but like way back from years ago, I was getting on video. And you are always so good about having a few little stories that you can relate to, things that just make you laugh. You don't have to go into a big piece to make you laugh. They make you nod, they make me smile. They sometimes make me tear up, but they're not big, long, involved things. They're really relatable. They're things that we can like get behind that we've probably experienced, or a friend has, or our partner has, or someone has. And just having a bank of those. And I think to lean into, I'm sure for spoken or for copy is big, you know, really makes a difference. It really helps you connect to people.
Yeah. This is not what I call them, but in my brain, this is like the word I just came up with that describes that. It's like, this is terrible. I better instantly regret saying this, but like lubricant stories. And what I mean by that is not what you think, people. So get your mind out of the gutter and you're welcome for this random little gem I'm about to deliver. It's like people think that their stories have to do a lot of heavy lifting to have a big lesson, but sometimes your story just needs to do exactly what you just said. Get the head nod, get the relatable piece, get people to believe like, okay, we're not actually that much different. Like, oh, I am approachable, or, oh, this is fun. Like some kind of moment that happens that makes people take the pressure off of the topic you're doing. It creates lubricant for when you then I don't think I should finish that sentence, but come in with like the bigger ideas, right? Like that, this is like the worst. I have to back out of this because now I've said that 3 times on the podcast and it feels south real quick. Bring us back.
Can I add on to that, which
yeah,
you're not going to love, but maybe you will. When I met you, Heather, I remember that we were talking again about speaking. And after you'd done that conference, and I was like, at that little talk, and I had said, okay, I feel like I'm more ready to go out and maybe try to do some IG lives. And you were like, yes, you're taking off the chastity belt of your speaking. I just want to say, I always love how you bring it around to something like that.
It's always sexual in some degree.
I can count on you for that at some point.
It's the unexpected thing. Side note, that's part of my, I'll have to like back it up here because I didn't do all of this intentionally, but I'll say things all the time like this random, I start talking about lubricant as the metaphor for this, or saying just lose the chastity belt and just do it. Inside our program, we talk about like one of the main phrases I use all the time is like, go lose your podcast virginity. Like just go, you lose your stage virginity, like go do it. And one of the reasons why I say that is because of that giggle lean in factor that I get every time I say shit like that. I know my audience starts laughing because they're like, I am being super precious with this. Like I am like building up this hype here. And my like male competitors in this space would never be caught dead saying anything like that. And the women that I work with, especially some of my clients who are in their 60s and 70s, they giggle so hard and it like reminds them to have fun. Like, so those are things that I've observed how my audience relates. When I say shit like that, it's not only true to my personality, but it also there's a strategic angle around how it pulls my ideal person in that they're not going to take themselves too seriously. So
for sure. Well, it worked for me 100%.
Yeah, good. Perfect. Job is done. Here we are 3 years later. You lost the chastity belt. Now look at you. You're a copy speaking hoe.
I'll take it. I'll wear that badge.
Yeah, you should. I'm going to create little logos for that at a future state. And I probably just lost half of our listeners as I called one of my favorite people a hoe. Okay, we should take a pivot and keep going on this related to copy. So one of the things that I wanted to do today with our conversation is you have so many little techniques. And one of the things that you do so well, not only do you write phenomenal copy and somehow are able to like read people's brains and then bring that brilliance out, but you also are a really good teacher, which goes back to the fact that you were a teacher for years. So you have a really unique ability to help people write their own copy, which quite frankly is a very rare thing. There's a lot of copywriters that try to teach it, but like you know how to teach and write copy. So I want to kind of pivot and start offering some insights for people who do write their own copy, whether it's content copy or launch copy. I'm curious from you, and where I want to start is, where do you typically find that people like obsessed over and focus when it comes to copywriting? And do you have any suggestions around maybe where they need to like not worry so much and shift their focus?
I'd say there's 2 areas. One, that they're worried about it always being too long. Like, is this too long, this copy?
I relate with that.
And then the other piece is that they try to professionalize it too much, right? They try to like really be the expert, right? But to the point that it's not sounding like them at all. Like it can be cold. It doesn't have their personality shining through. So those are the 2 areas where I feel like they sort of obsess and freak out over. And so what I would say to that is, number one, with making it too long, is that there are different types of people who are reading your copy. And we all bring these different experiences to, buying and reading and taking the next leap. And I think about that when I was teaching like grade 2, 3, and I was teaching math. And so before I would teach this addition unit, I'd always put up a question. So like, I'd maybe say something like, okay, so what's 52 plus 19? Like, how do you solve that? And I'd ask students this question. And I'd say, okay, like, go show me, however you do it, go show me. So they'd all like go and do it. And some kids would, do it the, let's say, proper way. I'm air quoting with like the carrying the 1 to make 71. Some would write it out. So it was actually like 611. So they wouldn't actually carry. They would just like write the numbers down in a line. Some would do tally marks. Some would break it up. The point is I would get like 7 or 8 different ways of responding to this one question. And if I hadn't have figured that out, if I hadn't have known where they were all coming from, I wouldn't have been able to connect with them and help them actually learn what they needed to learn to move to the next step. So that goes back to a sales page or something being too long, is that it's okay for things to be too long because or I'm going to say too long. There isn't really such a thing as too long as you're not just like rambling, like maybe I'm doing right this second. So I'm going to pull it back in.
You're
But the point being that like we all come with different needs, right? So some people will hop onto your page, let's say a sales page or a service page, and all they need to read at the top is that sort of emotional part that's at the top of a page, maybe where you're calling in their dreams or what's in it, if it's perfect for you. And they're going to really relate to that emotional side. And they're going to be like, yeah, damn, I'm in. Like, this is a solution. I'm so good. But then there's some people who want more of that risk reversal. They want to know your guarantees. They maybe want to, like, they're going to scan through those FAQs of yours, right? They're going to really read through testimonials. They want to know that proof because maybe they've been burned before, or they're really, maybe they have that $2,000, but like to part with it is a big deal, right? It really is a big deal. Like that's something they're going to commit to for the next year. They don't have any other budget. So they want to make sure they're putting it in the right spot. And if we don't know what people need and we don't take the time to speak to our different audience members who are coming, then we might lose them. So I think letting go of that fear of something being too long and just recognizing that people need different things from you on a page. And so it's okay if it's long, it's probably long for a reason, as long as, again, you're not rambling, as long as you have like different sections that address different needs. And then the other piece around, what was I going to say? The other piece was, around professionalizing it, is that I think it's okay, like start to do your writing, write it all out, if it's professionalized, and then go through it and start reading it out loud and asking yourself, okay, does this sound like me? Where can I fun this up, right? Like, where can I add a little bit of personality? Where can I change this to a word I actually use? Do I actually use these words? So you can like go back and listen to maybe an IG live you've done, or even have your partner or a best friend read it, like really, and say like, does this sound like me at all? And of course, maybe you aren't going to sound the same exactly you do with your best friend or your partner, but the fact if it sounds like too far off of you, like doesn't sound like how it really sounds like a whole other personality, like robotic, you change it up, see where you can add it in. Like maybe you can add in something around like what you eat or drink, or like a nod to your favorite show, or don't have things so formal. Maybe you're going to put a GIF in a page or something like that. Just little ways to add in your personality. Even like little side jokes that you think are funny, or even a hashtag, something like that, are just ways to start putting it in. But the truth is, like, unless you're probably in certain industries, you don't need to be overly professional. What you need to do is just show that you have a solution, that you're the person for them, and you might not be for everyone, and that's okay. But I think we risk losing more people if we are too not ourselves and too overly professional and trying to write like we're a college essay, when that's not where we are. And unless that is, again, your audience and you need to, but most of us, it's not in the online space.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is something, so this second piece here, the professionalism, that I want to circle back up on the length. But the professional piece, this was one of my probably best lessons learned when I shifted from corporate into entrepreneurship. And what I realized was there's a difference between when you're an employee in another company and you're writing, you're not only writing like your expertise, you're representing a brand. And so inherently you have to be a little bit of vanilla, because you can't be the one ruffling feathers for like the clients or the prospects or whatever else, right? So you have to kind of put this veneer over your copy. So in corporate, you like write it the way you want to say it, and then you go back in and add like the smooth down language.
Absolutely.
What I learned was I'd gotten so good at that, I wrote in the smooth, more whatever language. But when I moved to in the entrepreneur space, it was like very vanilla and it was very plain. And I'm like, I don't actually talk that way. And so I went through the process you were talking about, but what I would do is I would write in the way I would write, which was the prettier, smoother thing. And then I would have to go back and say, how would I actually say it? Blending the verbal and the written piece that we've been talking about. One of the tricks that I learned from a copywriter early on in my business was like, everything you write, you say it out loud. And as you're saying it, if you're like, I would never say that, like, that's like a cue to change it. Like, I think, and I can't remember if you taught me this or not, but it was like something as simple as like, you would never say, therefore, blah, blah, blah out loud. Like, that's a very written word, but like you would say, so blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just that kind of thing of like finding that sticky piece around that. So I love those suggestions of like, write it and then go back and infuse like infuse your stuff. Do you have any other tips around that piece, around that like yin yang between like saying things out loud and typing?
Well, the other thing that I like to do, and I mean, I do this with my clients, but I recommend you can do this for yourself, is make yourself like a mini voice guide, really. So with that, like you might remember this, Heather, when we started working together, but I sent you like a questionnaire and it was like, how do you greet people? What emojis do you use? Do you use swears? What swears are they? What are the things that you always like? What are the shows that you always reference? Maybe like, I actually like to know what decade people grew up in, right? So think about what decade and what does you remember about that decade. So maybe you grew up like in the 80s and 90s and you reference like Mario Kart and jelly shoes and different things. So I make a little guide of things where you can know what you're talking around, some of the language you use, the swears that you do use, the abbreviations you use, if there's hashtags, maybe some of the jokes that have resonated with folks before than people you've talked to. And I like to have that as like a little reference so that you can go back and you can compare your copy to that and be like, does this sound like this person? And how can I incorporate some of these things that I'm known for and these things that I like to talk about into my copy? So if you're someone who's always like, I always have a chai tea latte half sweet on my desk, like how do you bring that in maybe into something? If you're like a Schitt's Creek fan and you're going to watch it in a repeat, or a Friends or an Office person, like maybe you're going to, incorporate that in, or a little joke to that. So just having a list of some of those things that you're known for can really help too. So you're not just pulling it from your head.
Yeah. I love that tip. I think this goes with so many things when it comes to stories, when it comes to these little personality pieces. I think we put a lot of, going back to expectations we talked about earlier, we put this expectation on ourselves that like we should know these things. So we think that we should just remember them when we sit down to write. And one of the things that you taught me really well was like, you don't come up with that brilliance. I mean, sometimes you do, right? When you're writing, but like you're always constantly looking back at those personality pieces or that story bank or words that you gathered from our core audience. Like you're always referencing those. And that was a really powerful tip that I knew, but I hadn't practiced. And this is something that I want everyone to think about. Like you have to create that list for you to look at, because if you expect just to remember these things when you're writing, you're really setting up yourself for like a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And another fun way, like an easy way to start incorporating personality is I think in the micro copy. So if you have an image you're putting up, maybe you can put like a funny little caption underneath. That's just a way to start. So it's almost like an aside, right? So maybe you have this like professional copy or this, this certain round that you've written, but to add your like little personality through that. I love to add personality. And you might notice this, like, I know Heather, I'm sure you've seen this on your sales page, but there's the main headline we have for every section, but then I like to do like a little subheading above it. And that little subheading above it is where I try to add a little bit more of that personality, where it's like, again, those side notes, those kind of things that you're maybe going to laugh at. So you might say something like my spicy take on what's really happening. And then you have like the headline to the next thing, or, why I'm the, the Cleo to your Joanna, or to your Joanna. Is it Joanna or Joanna for the home edit? Yeah. So like those kind of little things where you just add in, again, like a little side note you're saying to people, like a little whisper, but then you can still stick with your main copy. But it's a chance for them to get to know you through those little micro copy pieces, those little opportunities.
Which that's one of those things that's really fascinating, because y'all, if you listen to the podcast, I do side notes all the time. In fact, we have a whole thing. It's called a Sager side note. My students coined years ago, because I'm like micro celebrity famous, but just me, around like telling a story and then telling another story simultaneously. And then sometimes a third story to the second story simultaneously. Like I do that in my verbal all the time. And so being able to then infuse that into an email to go on those little side tangents, like that's really cool. This is a dummy thing, but maybe other people listening will also feel very happy to learn this. I didn't know you could create captions in a photo in an email. Like that was not a functionality thing that I knew was even possible until you wrote captions. And I'm like, but I don't understand how we do that. And then Dorothy on my team was like, you put it here in this part that says captions when you upload the photo. And I'm like, oh, so like some of those basic functionalities for anyone listening, if you use ConvertKit, that's what we use for our email. It's very simple. I think Kajabi also does it, like depending on software, but captions in an image, I didn't even know that was a thing. And it very much is. And I love that you brought that little gem to our lives.
Yay.
Okay, I love that. Okay, do you have any tips for someone who's like, okay, I hear you, we got to practice a little bit more, I can come up with that little like list for personality and like list for stories, but for someone who feels a lot of resistance when they sit down to write, let's even say it's just their weekly newsletter, right? Do you have any tips for someone who's really struggling to get into writing an email? And I say this as I'm staring at a draft of this week's soapbox email that needs to go out. So like, can you give us some tips of advice here, Sarah, around how
Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So there's two main things. So one is in the short term and one is in the long term. So I'll start with the long term. In the long term, I would love to see everyone send out a survey to your audience at least once a year to see what's going on with them. So asking them like, what are their related to what you do, of course. So, like, what are your hopes and dreams? Why does it matter? Related to what you do, the thing that you offer. What's stopping you from getting that right now? What are you trying on your own right now to make it happen? If you could ask me any questions, how could I help you? Some things like that. Those are the type of questions I want you to ask, because when you are feeling stuck, go back to that survey and go through something and choose a topic and write about it. Like, it will really help you know exactly what's going to connect with folks going on. And that is what, as a copywriter, I do. And I know so many other fellow copywriters do that too. We have surveys, like you said, we pull from all of that, juicy stuff that we find from folks, and we use that to write. And so I encourage everyone to do that at least once a year, have that survey. That's the long-term plan, right? In the short term, I would say that the few things that I do when I would get stuck is, one, I think about what is the goal of this email. And I don't try to put too much pressure on this email. This one, don't think this email is the one email to like solve it all, right? It's not like the one ring to rule it all, like Lord of the Rings, if any of you have watched that. Like, you don't need this one email, doesn't have to do all the work for you. It shouldn't be all the heavy lift. Your emails are, if you send them every week, are building on each other all the time. So take off the pressure, essentially. So think, what is this one email about? What do you really want to get across? Like, do you want them to know maybe one tip? Do you want them to know about something you have coming up? Do you want them to walk away? Do you want them to reply to you? Like, what is the really big goal of this email? And just focus on that. And then also think about, so that's one. And then I would also set up, I use a timer. I often use Focus Keeper. So I just make myself end the email. Like, I'll give myself 2 Focus Keeper rounds, which is an hour if I'm feeling stuck. And after that, I'll read it. I'll kind of scrub it to make sure it doesn't sound terrible. And I'll just hit send, honestly, because it has to go. Like, we don't have time to spend 4 hours on one email, right? Absolutely. And then the other thing is, I think about the sections of an email. I think, okay, I want to start with some kind of story. So what is a little micro story that I'm going to tell? So I might look at my story bank. What's that story? Okay. And then how am I going to segue to the next part? I might say something as simple as, well, this brings me to you, or this reminds me of something that I want to share with you this week. Like a super simple segue into whatever you want to say. Say the thing. If you've already talked about it on a podcast or an Instagram or somewhere, honestly, copy and paste some of that. Go to your transcript, go to the Instagram, copy and paste that stuff right in there, and just scrub it up a little bit so it makes sense for an email, like edit it a little bit and then sign off. Like, so that's what I would do.
I love that.
Helpful or not? Yeah.
It's so helpful. I actually wrote all of them down, and we're going to include all of them in the show notes because they're so simple, right? But these are the things that actually will make a difference, that will continue. I love 2 things. Well, I loved everything that you said, but 2 things that really jumped out was the little brilliance around the segue. It doesn't have to be this big, profound thing. You just need to connect the dots between the story and what you're going to say. Like, that brings me to you, or this, like, so when it comes to this, like, think about that. Like, it's just a very easy transitionary piece that I think people get stuck on. So giving them permission for that. I love that. And the second thing was when you were talking about, go to something you've already done, a podcast episode, a caption, something else, and just make it work for the email. I think so often people think that every email and everything that we do or say has to be new. And I always tell people, like, you shouldn't be coming up with a lot of new stuff all the time. Like, you should be repeating yourself if you want to be known for something. The only way that you become known as an authority is that you speak on the same thing over and over again. So I think taking the pressure off of having to have like a new thing in your email and just referring back to your old brilliance is still brilliant. Like, just repeat it.
Absolutely.
I think that's Such a good reminder. Such a good reminder.
You can, and oftentimes if you have been following anyone in an inbox for a while, like I can think of several business owners that I love, and I love reading their emails. Honestly, like once or twice a year, I'll see almost the same core of the thing they're trying to teach us with just a different story attached to it, like a different intro, essentially. Because again, they're coming back to the same things, and and they're known for that, right? So you're known for certain things. Heather, when I was writing your emails and I was listening to like all of your podcasts and going through, you had some core things that you kept hitting on, but you said them in different ways. And so I just pulled them out, but I would just pull them out and put them into the emails, and they maybe seem very brand new, but they're actually just paired with a different story or told a little bit with a different lens. So we can definitely do that, but absolutely we want to go back and repeat and use our content as much as possible. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Again, it's one email. It's not going to ruin your business. One email. It's not going to make the end of all your sales. You have next week to do it again, right? And you're going to learn as people respond or reply to you what's working and what's not. So just keep going.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I love that. Okay. The thing that you do really, really well, I mean, a lot of things, right? But launch copy specifically, it is really intimidating for a business owner, especially somebody who doesn't write a lot of copy. We fall into this land and realize, oh my gosh, the volume of copy it's a lot. Like, it really is about being able to articulate your message in a succinct way that other people can follow. You have an incredible, I'm just going to brag on you for a moment, because you have one of the most generous like free resources that I have ever seen in this space, and not in an overwhelming way, and like the perfect way of going like, this is mind blowing. You should probably charge a shit ton of money for this, but you don't. Can you talk about your launch map and the most like brilliant Google sheet I've ever seen in my life?
It's funny you say that, because when I remember showing it to my OBM, she literally walked off the screen. She was like, no, you're not gonna skip that away. I'm like,
it's crazy.
And I'm so happy.
And so amazing that you give it away, because it is the map around what someone needs, or could work up towards, right? If you want to have like a really grandiose launch, but people might not start there, right? They work into it, but you have the whole picture of what that could look like. So can you share a little bit about that? And then y'all, we're gonna give you the link to be able to go grab yours. I grabbed mine instantly when Sara showed this on Instagram. I'm like, yes, please. Yes, please. I will take 2.
For sure. So it is like a Google Doc, and essentially I've given you a tab for each of the, let's call them sequences of what you need in a launch. So there's like the lead magnet sequence, your webinar show up sequence, sales sequence, and then I believe I put I did put the post purchase sequence in there. I listed the emails you want to send, the timing of each of those emails, and a high level note of what goes into them. So what is like the core messaging you want to have here? So frequently asked questions that address X, or maybe you want to shift to beliefs to help people understand your solution or tell your story. So I've given you a high level note of what that looks like, and also giving you some suggestions on how to incorporate yourself into it, and like, so you can connect with folks. I've listed that all out, and I've given you a little video walkthrough. And so it is like, if you look at it, you're like, wow, there's like 35 plus emails here, Sara. That's a lot. And I want to say to you, as you said, Heather, this is like where you can aim towards. You don't have to go there right away. Maybe you're going to start with a lead magnet. Maybe you're going to incorporate some of these pieces, but at least you can have the whole picture and see where to start, what might go in them. So you're not starting from scratch, because there's nothing worse than like thinking about that, all those things that you have to write and having no idea where to begin. I don't want that for anybody. Like,
yeah. Okay. So it's almost like the metaphor that I was thinking as you were talking through this is like, you know how when you like buy a house or move into a new place, how it's like you make that determination around like, am I going to bring in my own furniture that we have? Are we going to buy new furniture? Like, I don't know about you, but every time we move into a new place, we always want to like redo everything. But the likelihood of us buying all new furniture is probably pretty low. So I think about this when I look at that launch, the messaging map is like, there's all these pieces that you could look at and be like, I have to do everything. But likelihood, you already have a couch. You already have some pieces. Like you do a mix of things that you already have, and then you start adding in new things until you have the room or the home that's like all the pieces, which is what you want to live in. So I think about that when it comes to that map. So I think for people who are like, you need to go grab it right now. Sara, where do people grab the messaging map?
They can go to saravartanian.com/launch-map. And I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes if you want to spell my last name, but it'll be in there and you can grab it. And it'll give a little walkthrough for you and enjoy the map. And if you download it, let me know that you did so that I can cheer you on and answer any questions about it.
I love that. And Sarah's so generous in that with all of those pieces in there. She's also got some really other great things. So feel free to poke around her website a little bit if you would like, and kind of check it out. If you want to see Sarah's copywriting in action, y'all, if you log into any or opt into any of our freebies right now at the Speaker Co., the emails that you get in the sequence to welcome you to Emily and I in the Speaker Co., that welcome sequence was written by Sarah herself as our collaboration of our project over the spring and summer. So if you have laughed at our emails with references to the home edit or friends or any of those things, those are Sarah's wordsmithing, bringing my brain and Emily's brain into the written copy. So see it in action there. It's possible. Okay, Sarah, let's wrap up this episode. Is there any other things on your mind that you want people to keep top of mind as they're venturing into this? They might not be like you starting the episode of wearing the label, I am a copywriter, but is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave them with in the idea of them owning some kind of label for themselves?
I think that we all have the writer within us. We all have stories to tell. And I want you to remember that you are telling them to, again, your friends, your partners, your children. You're talking your things all the time. So just maybe again, take note of those things that make people smile, that make you smile, and start sharing them in your business. They'll really help you connect with folks. People will love to see that you're human and who you are. And I think that really warms them up to work with you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You do such a good job of that in your content and in your writing. And it's just such a gift that you're so generous to share it with others so that they can do the same. So Sarah, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. Emily and I, every time we got copy back, we're just oh my gosh, how is it possible that someone could reach into our brain and extract it out and make us look and sound so damn good? But you do that well. And so I hope that, and I know that what you shared today is only going to help other people get their brilliance out in the world. So thank you so much for being here. Y'all, be sure to follow along with Sarah on Instagram. It's at Sara Vartanian on Instagram, correct? And grab her launch map. We will include links to everything in the show notes. And please be very generous and tell Sarah, if you post a little picture of today's episode, screenshot it, share it, tag us both. Tell us what resonated with y'all today. Was it the chastity belt thing? I don't know. Maybe. Was it the lubricant? I don't know. There were so many gems in this episode. Sarah, what was your favorite?
I will say that I loved the lubricant thing, of course. And I like reminiscing too about our meet cute, let's call it. Well. Thank you so much for having me on here today, Heather. It was so much fun.
Of course. Always so fun. All right, friends, we will see you all on the next episode. Bye.